The year was 1827, and the air of the Ohio Valley was thick with the scent of pine, damp earth, and audacious hope. New Harmony, not the genuine settlement in Indiana, but a fledgling pocket of idealists deeper into the Kentucky frontier, stood as a monument to intellectual ambition, a raw, timber-framed rejection of the tyranny of the Old World. Its main thoroughfare, still more mud than road, was lined with clapboard homes and a single imposing stone meeting house that the villagers, mostly educated European exiles, ironically called the Temple of Unreason. This was the American dream distilled to its most potent, fragile essence. They had fled the stifling social strata of England, the rigid dogmas of Germany, and the revolutionary fatigue of France, seeking a place where a community could be built purely on radical ideals. But ambition, when planted on the untamed frontier, often yielded a bitter harvest. The saga belonged to two families whose lives were, by necessity and by fate, irrevocably intertwined. The first were the Ardens, led by Elias Arden, a man whose spine was as straight and unyielding as the mast of the ship that had brought him across the Atlantic. Elias, a disgraced philosopher from London, viewed New Harmony as his final great experiment. He saw only the promise, a chance to raise his daughter Clara free from the prejudices of class. Clara, 18, possessed her father's idealism, yet saw the surrounding wilderness not as an enemy to be conquered, but as a vast, whispering entity she longed to understand. She was the light of their stark home, yet she carried a shadow, the painful memory of the European world her father had so fiercely rejected. The second were the Cains. Their roots were sunk deep in this soil, a fighting legacy spanning 3 generations of tough, land-claiming Americans. They viewed the utopian enclave of New Harmony with suspicion, bordering on resentment. The Cains had fought the French, the British, and the Shawnee to preserve their acreage, and now these European idealists were claiming the choicest plot just north of their property line. Jebediah Cain, a towering man of 40 with hands like oak knots, was fighting to preserve his family's inheritance, a sprawling farm he considered his rightful kingdom. His eldest son, Silas, however, possessed a restlessness that chafed against his father's stubborn loyalty to the land. Silas saw the world stretching far beyond the Ohio River, and the learned residents of New Harmony, particularly the luminous, reserved Clara Arden, represented that unreachable horizon. The tension between the two communities was palpable, a constant low-frequency hum beneath the sounds of axe and saw. The Ardens saw the Cains as uncouth, uneducated roadblocks to progress. The Cains saw the Ardens as pretentious, transient dreamers who would fail, leaving their land vulnerable to purchase. One late autumn afternoon, the simmering conflict boiled over. Elias Arden's community had pooled its resources to purchase a state-of-the-art threshing machine, a piece of industrial marvel meant to symbolize their efficiency and technological superiority. But the machine, purchased from Philadelphia and hauled laboriously over the mountains, became mired in the mud of the Cain property, a shortcut Elias had unwisely insisted upon. Jebediah Cain found the foreign machine, its gears sinking into his clay, and stood over it like a sentinel of the frontier. When Elias and a handful of his settlers arrived, their faces flush with panic and frustration, Jebediah did not move. "Get that mechanical monstrosity off my property, Arden," Jebediah rumbled, his voice low, but carrying the weight of the wilderness. "Mr. Cain, it's stuck. It's an investment for all of us," Elias pleaded, wiping a bead of sweat from his brow. "We simply need a few hours and perhaps the help of your mule team to pull it free." "You want my help? You want my mules?" Jebediah scoffed. "You and your friends, you preach your revolutionary fervor, your radical ideals, but you don't know the first thing about revolutionary work, do you? This land doesn't care about your philosophy, Arden. It cares about sweat and strength, and you came across my land without so much as a by your leave." As the argument escalated, Silas Cain emerged from the tree line carrying a buck he had successfully tracked and killed. He was tall, dressed in worn buckskins, and his eyes, a startling blue, fixed not on his father, but on Clara Arden, who was standing slightly behind Elias, She was pale, dressed in a simple, high-necked gown that looked alien in the forest. Yet she met his gaze with a surprising firmness. "Pa, the machine is stuck deep. It'll take a full team and a good winch. Arguing won't change the mud." Jebediah glared at his son. "Stay out of this, Silas. These people need to learn respect. They need to learn survival, Pa, and if they lose that machine, they'll lose a lot more than just a little pride. We'll be living next to starving men this winter." Silas's intervention was a small, fragile bridge built across a chasm of mutual mistrust. He did not offer his help for free, however. He looked straight at Elias Arden. "We'll pull it out for a fair price. We'll need 50 pounds of flour from your community stores and permission to use your water wheel to grind our next harvest, a proper neighborly trade." Elias hesitated. The flour was a considerable portion of their winter stores, but the loss of the thresher meant ruin. He clenched his jaw, the philosopher forced to yield to the pragmatist. "Agreed, Mr. Cain, 50 pounds and the water wheel." The exchange, witnessed by both communities, was less a treaty and more a truce. It was the moment that Elias Arden's lofty dream collided violently with the harsh realities of the burgeoning nation, a world where the untamed frontier demanded a price not just for land, but for mere existence. And it was the first charged moment that Silas Cain, the grounded son of the soil, offered his silent, reluctant allegiance not to his father's resentment, but to a better, more complicated future, one personified by the resolute young woman from the East. The seeds of both conflict and a deeper, more personal connection had been sown, waiting for the relentless currents of fate to water them.
He Rides South was a brutal, desperate affair. Alastair, the philosopher steward, found himself relying entirely on Silas Cain, the man he and his community had long dismissed as uncouth. Silas rode with the silent, innate authority of the frontier, navigating the treacherous, flooded deer trails with an instinct honed over a lifetime. Josiah, the runaway boy, was tied securely to the saddle, shivering violently, his fever spiking. Alastair watched the receding silhouette of New Harmony, feeling the weight of the community's betrayal, both his own and Tobias's. The utopia was now just a distant shadow, a beacon of broken ideals. "You should have left him," Silas finally grunted, breaking the long silence as they paused by a swollen creek. "They'll hunt us to Virginia for him. One boy for a whole community's existence? That's a bad trade, Thorne." "It's the only trade that matters, Cain," Alastair retorted, bitterness sharp in his voice. "If we abandon the principles we were founded upon, what is left to save?" Silas scoffed. "Principle doesn't fill bellies or keep bullets away. Survival, Thorne, is the only principle worth keeping." Their mutual dependency was a source of constant friction. Yet, as they worked together to stabilize Josiah, a grudging respect began to form. Silas knew remedies the European doctors never taught, gathering specific mosses and herbs to soothe the boy's burning skin. Alastair, in turn, used his meager knowledge of medicine to keep the fever from overtaking Josiah. As dawn broke, painting the eastern sky in bruised purples and grays, they reached the Ohio River, a churning, vast barrier separating the free state of Kentucky from the slave state of Virginia. "The crossing is suicide here," Silas observed, pointing up the swift, debris-laden current. "We'll have to go 2 miles downstream to the old ferry landing, and even then, we'll need a boat large enough for 3 men and 3 horses." Alastair's heart sank. He knew that landing. It was notorious for being watched, especially since the Harper's Ferry raid. This was their moment of the greatest exposure.
Before they could move, a rider appeared on the riverbank, approaching from the south. It was Eliza Vance. She wore a man's coat over her dress and looked exhausted, but her eyes were fiercely determined. "I knew you'd cross here," she said, pulling her horse to a halt. "My husband's overseer is waiting at the ferry landing with the magistrate. It's a trap, Alastair. They know you have the boy." "How do they know? Did you tell them?" Alastair demanded, the suspicion he had suppressed now bubbling up, laced with pain. "I didn't tell them about you," she insisted, her voice trembling, "but I told them about Josiah.
I confirmed the rumors of a runaway on the property. My father wants to catch you red-handed with the boy, proving New Harmony is a dangerous sanctuary. It's the proof they need to seize the land." "You betrayed us," Alastair whispered, the words costing him more than any gold. "I saved you," Eliza cried, her composure cracking. "If they find you at the ferry, they arrest you as a felon. If I give them the lesser prize, the runaway, I distract them. They think I'm loyal. I told them I saw Josiah and that he was moving north, away from the river. They are chasing phantom trails now, while they wait for you at the landing." It was a brilliant, agonizing maneuver. She had sacrificed the boy's original safety to buy Alastair and Silas time. She was operating within the morality of the gilded parlors of her upbringing, playing the political game with brutal effectiveness, pitting a small lie against a greater disaster. Eliza then offered the true path of survival. "My family owns an old tobacco barge moored a few miles downriver. It's meant to be hauled to Louisville for repair. My brother-in-law, who is quietly unionist, is overseeing the transport. He can hide you both beneath the cargo and take you across to a secure spot near Wheeling, West Virginia. You must go there. It's the only way to save the boy and your land." She handed Alastair a heavy leather pouch. Inside was a large sum of gold coin. "This is not my father's money. It is mine. Use it to bribe the crew if you must. Do not come back until the war breaks out. They will be looking for traitors here." The gold shone in the weak morning light. It was the antithesis of New Harmony's communitarian ideal, yet it was the only means of salvation. Alastair realized that the better world wasn't going to be built on abstract faith, but on the raw, necessary compromises between ideology and power, and the extraordinary sacrifices of conflicted people like Eliza. "And you?" Alastair asked, his eyes filled with the crushing weight of their forbidden love. "I go back," she said simply. "I return to my home, to my marriage, and play the dutiful Southern daughter. I am your spy now, Alastair. The forbidden love that threatens to tear our world apart will also be the means to hold it together." She leaned in, pressing a desperate final kiss on his lips, a kiss of goodbye, of affirmation, and of agonizing betrayal. She was willingly returning to a gilded cage to protect his idealism.
Alastair and Silas used the gold to secure passage on the barge, hiding Josiah beneath a tarp full of stale tobacco leaves. The journey was slow, terrifying, and fraught with the smell of river water and dread. As they steamed north, the reality of the impending war was no longer abstract theory. On the barge, they witnessed the movement of troops, the nervous, aggressive chatter of river captains, and the absolute division of the country. When they finally disembarked near Wheeling, a town loyal to the Union that would soon become West Virginia, Silas spoke, his voice unusually quiet. "I've spent my life fighting men who wanted my land, Thorne. Now I see men fighting over principles and property they don't even own." He looked at Alastair. "You took a risk on the boy. You took a risk on me. The debt is settled." Alastair watched Silas walk away, disappearing into the chaotic anonymity of the budding Union military recruitment camps. He was now alone with Josiah, carrying Eliza's gold and facing a nation on the brink of collapse. He had saved the boy, but the cost was the purity of his utopia. He had compromised his ideals with Southern gold and cemented his future with a forbidden Southern love. New Harmony's light had not been completely extinguished, but it had been irrevocably tainted. It was no longer a flawless ideal, but a messy, human reality, a place where faith and ideology were pitted daily against the ultimate cost of freedom. The sacrifices made by those who dared to believe, and the dangerous truth that survival often required the very secrets and betrayals one sought to escape. As the first shots of the Civil War echoed from distant cannon practice, Alastair knew he would return to New Harmony not as its philosophical steward, but as its flawed, battle-scarred protector.
carrying the shadow of the South and the promise of a dark, necessary war.